Hello, everybody. How are you this evening? This is Paul Carruthers. I'm the communications manager for MotoAmerica. Somebody told me I need to stop introducing myself because they'd automatically know who this is, but that doesn't make any sense to me because what if it's your first time listening? But the person who told me that, he's kind of an idiot anyway, so we'll just ignore that and move on. This is Off Track with Paul Carruthers and Sean Bice. Sean is my partner who he's actually across the country in Ohio. I'm in Southern California. That sort of sets the scene. We're both on the verge of Christmas here, as is everybody else this holiday season. Sean, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and you're right. It won't be long. Few more days, and Santa will be coming. So I'm really excited about it. I haven't put the milk out yet because he doesn't like sour milk, is from what I understand. So milk and cookies will be on the way though for when the boy shows up for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I always know it's not that close yet because I haven't started shopping.
You're like Homer Simpson. You can just go the night before to the convenience store. And, how would you like some cigarillos for Christmas this year?
Actually, I fib because I've done pretty well this year thanks to like Amazon Prime.
Oh yeah.
But this morning, my son and I went down. We had to pick up a few things, and it was one of those days where you walk into the store and like you see the two things you need instantly, and you're gone in like 12 minutes, and you're like. You kind of feel guilty, like, oh, did I not put enough thought into that gift? But I'd rather put less thought and be gone quicker. So,
man, when the stars align and you find that thing right there in the store immediately, that makes it a lot easier. That's for sure.
Well, we were both looking at each other like, okay, did this just really happen? I mean, are we really out of here in 10 minutes? So it worked out good. Okay, our guest today. It's kind of cool. Our guest today sits in the office right next to me at the luxurious MotoAmerica headquarters in Costa Mesa, California. So we're separated by 2 feet, and like 6 inches of that is a wall. So we converse quite frequently about life and MotoAmerica. Probably more life than MotoAmerica. James is almost like my life coach. And I don't know if I should be worried about that or not, but he is. But anyway, James Morse is our technical director for MotoAmerica. So when the bikes come off the racetrack, they go to Tech and Parc Fermé, and him and his crew are the ones that run the bikes through Tech. And if there's any protests or somebody thinks there's some monkey business going on, then James is in charge of, telling the mechanic he's got to strip the thing down to the frame. And then everybody hates him. And this year, I felt really bad for James because he went from the KTM Cup series to Junior Cup. And as you know, the spec class, KTM class, was probably the easiest class that he had on his plate because everybody rode the same bikes. Nobody complained. Then we came up with Liqui Moly Junior Cup class, and James's life changed dramatically. I noticed he started to get a little bit of gray on the hair that was remaining. He was a little more stressed, like his face sometimes had this angry look that I never seen before.
The furrowed brow.
Oh my God, which dad is going to yell at me next? Or I think Chuck Graves is coming. Or, oh no, there's Dale Quarterly. I better hide. But anyway, so it made James's life a little bit more interesting this year. So let's bring him in and we can have a chat with him. I figured who best to get our new rules package. They're not new rules packages, but we've tweaked a few things. But I figured it would be best to get that straight from the horse's mouth. And I don't mean to call you a horse, James. So welcome to the show. I'm sure you missed me in the office today because I'm not there. And I know you're sad, but can you kind of perk up a little bit and talk to us for, I don't know, 50 more minutes?
Yeah, let's do this. It's very boring in the office right now. There's about three of us, and we're all contemplating when we're going to leave. So,
yeah, you're doing that. You go first, and I'll go second. And then if they ask about you, I'll say you just went to the store.
Right. They keep nudging towards the door. So.
Boy,
Yeah,
I'll tell you, James, my perception of what's going on right now is completely different from what you're saying, because with these rules coming out, I just picture you at this giant keyboard, manipulating things and saying, what will we announce next? I thought for sure that's how it was going to go. Plus, is it true, or did I hear incorrectly? Did you in fact invent Morse code?
Yeah, actually, that was my great grandfather.
Oh, it's in the family. Okay.
Yeah, it's in the family. So
he wasn't even that great until he invented it.
Right. Right. More of the poor grandfather. Now he's great.
but seriously, James, tell us, what is your background with what you do? This is a legitimate question for me, because I actually don't know where you come from and what you did, and before this and all that. So can you give us that rundown?
Yeah. It was kind of, I totally got here oddly, but I started off my career as a mechanic for in the automotive business. So I was a mechanic for BMW for 12 years, and about halfway through that, I had always ridden motorcycles and worked on my own, but a friend of mine and I started a motorcycle shop. And we got pretty popular in Southern California for club racing, and we did some nationals and stuff like that. But in the end, we just kind of decided to sell the business and look into other opportunities. And so I was out of a job, and it just happened at the same time MotoAmerica had started. And I got a call from Nicole, who was kind of club raced with us, when we owned the shop, and said, "Hey, we're looking for a technical manager." And so I applied, and I just happened to, live in Irvine, so it was right by the headquarters. So it all kind of just worked out. I wouldn't say I was particularly qualified for this position, but I had been around it, for a long time. So from there, it was just learning the ropes. And I worked with Scott quite a bit, Scott Smart, to learn how to do this thing. And so far it's worked out, I think. I'm sure there's plenty of people that would say otherwise. But
screw those people.
Yeah, right. So
do you feel the pressure of the job? Do you feel like it's one of those thankless tasks where if you set the rules, it's like, kind of, not that rules are made to be broken, but there's always interpretation of the rules, so people are always coming to you. Do you feel that on the day-to-day or at the racetrack?
Yeah, Paul was saying how this year was definitely the worst. It was the toughest, because I think the hardest, what you feel is that all these, racers actually have a lot of money and time invested in this. And so it does hit them more than just whether they're winning or losing a race. It's, to some people, it's their livelihood. And so these decisions are, really important. So they do weigh on you. If you feel like, it's not going the right direction, or a certain rule isn't the way it should be, or whatever. But it's tough because everybody's got their own, wants a different thing. It's not easy to come up with one set of rules that fits everybody. So
when we got to the end of the Liqui Moly Junior Cup class this year, did it achieve a balance or close to a balance, do you think?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think the last few rounds, I think we got there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It felt like there was the brands where, there were brands on the podium. It was a multitude of different brands, at least three, obviously. But I felt that too. But I wondered what you felt about it. If there's still more tweaking, or will it always have tweaking?
I I hope not.
Mm-hmm.
But
right.
yeah, I mean, we're going to start the year with some new balancing concepts, mainly because it's, the way that we did it this year was purely on a RPM limit for each bike. We did allow some small modifications for the Yamaha, but the problem with that is some of the bikes like Kawasaki, where we took 2000 RPM out of it, it's hard for them to find a gearing combination that works. Places like MotoAmerica, you just have to go as tall as possible when you're down 2000 RPM. So now we're looking for new ways to balance them that don't affect the RPM so much, so that they have more gearing choices.
I mean, that's the thing that I think is tricky. You think about in Superbike, and we'll get into that in a bit, but, I just know the first couple rounds seem to favor the Suzuki if you're talking about the two factory teams, and Yamaha always comes on a little bit later, and I hear them say, well, this isn't a Yamaha track. Well, there isn't balancing involved in Superbike, so you can only do so much balancing anyway, because the characteristics of motorcycles are all different in some ways, even though their displacement might be close to the same.
Yeah, and actually we don't want to balance, the other classes. I know there's some degree in every class just how you make the rules, but Junior Cup, we purposely say we're going to balance this. That way, they don't go too far with modifications. We're trying to cap price, and we're trying to get as many people involved as possible. So the idea is that you can grab any bike, any, minimal modification, and you can go out and race and start your career. The other classes, Superbike, we're saying, you have a huge window of modifications to go win the race, and it's going to cost some money. It's like, that's how it is. So
it's called a Superbike for a reason, right?
Right.
Okay, James, I got a question regarding the Junior Cup and the weight regulations. What I want you've seen me and my body type, and you've seen Sean and his body type. And Sean, let me just get it out in the open right now. I love you. You're handsome, and I want to kiss you. Anyway, he's really familiar with my body type, because when we go on bicycle rides, he's always trying to draft me because I'm a lot stronger rider than he is, and that's the only way he can really start, not get dropped.
He doesn't
so anyways,
leave much of a draft.
No, the air behind smells sweet and is thin. Anyhow, so
call it dirty. My question in NASCAR, they call it dirty air, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So anyway, let's say that Sean and I are of equal talent.
Yeah.
Who
I would draft Sean.
No, I'm talking about in the Junior Cup race. Right. So we're of equal talent. We're both incredible road racers, and we piss excellence in the morning. And but I'm smaller and he's bigger, so I have to add weight to my bike, and he gets to take weight away. Is there an advantage to being one of those or the other?
I think that it's you do have an advantage being the lighter rider, because you can add weight wherever you like on the motorcycle. So you have a choice of where the weight goes. On the other side, though, the heavier riders are generally taller too. So they do, if you are taller, and some of these kids are actually really tall and thin, but they have good leverage over the bike, or better leverage over the bike. And I mean, you've seen like Aaron Yates muscle the bike around. But I think the advantage goes to a lighter rider.
Yeah. See, Sean, you're screwed.
Yeah, Paul, I just want to say, let's talk about football. If you were carrying the ball, you want me in front of you. I mean, yeah. I want to knock down some bodies on the way through.
No, I would follow you anywhere with a football in my arm.
Hey, James, so I have a question regarding that weight. I was over in Alec Dumas' pit area during the summer, and I was talking to Dustin Apgar, his crew chief, and I had noticed that there was something in the middle of the bike down just above the swing arm that was all taped up, and I had a feeling what it was, but I said, what is that? It looks like a battery. And he said, Oh, it's actually the ballast we have to put on the bike. And so clearly Alex not a big guy, and that RC 390R is quite fast. And obviously they had to put weight on it because of the balancing. They put it in that position. And to your point, they can put it anywhere, but it sure seems like a smart place to put it, around the middle of the bike and fairly low on it. Do you think that there's a strategy on where that weight goes?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
Okay.
that helps the bike quite a bit. And him and Sean both had to add the same amount of weight. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, but because we didn't balance, combined, it was just bike weight. So you can
Okay.
see how that was kind of an advantage, for Alex versus Sean, because Sean is, I don't know, I would say roughly 10 or 15 pounds heavier
Right.
than Alex, So,
Okay.
in this case, I feel like, in that case, I feel like the combination of the weight and bike would have been a benefit for them, to balance between the two.
Mm. And do you and is that why I mean, Sean, towards as the season went on, he struggled a little bit. Do you think that was part of adapting to the changes for him?
Yes. Yeah. Adding
Okay.
weight to a bike is tough,
Hmm.
and taking the RPM out of it is tough too. It's
Right.
like working with what you have now is hard to do. So, it's just Dumas really, overcame that stuff and rode really well.
Right. He
So,
did. Another conversation I had was, I think it was early on, and I know early in the season when Jamie Astudillo got her podium in the wet, that bike, that Kawasaki Ninja 400 out of the box was obviously fast and was the target in terms of having to change some things on it. I don't remember which round it was, but you can tell me. And they got limited on their RPM, and she was saying it really, really changed it a lot. At least in the first practice, they had the gearing wrong on the bike, so it was like it basically shut off, and it kind of surprised her a little bit. Can you speak to that a little bit? How things affect with the RPM?
yeah, so after Atlanta, we made major changes at VIR. And it was, we weren't sure how far we were going to make a change because we're waiting for the World Super Sport 300 to race before we could get any baseline data on how much to go. So, knowing that it would be a big change, we released a bulletin that said, be prepared for up to 2,500 RPM removed, meaning
Wow.
go get as many gears as you can that are available to you, sprockets and whatever it takes. Well, VIR, nobody was ready. I mean, every Kawasaki, we had taken 2,000 RPM out of it, and every Kawasaki was on the rev limiter down the straightaway,
Hmm.
and that
Hmm.
and that stayed that way pretty much through qualifying. And then the next day, people started getting it sorted out, But it was definitely a big adjustment.
Yeah, it sounded like it was a real big difference for those guys. One of the other things we heard, and you kind of spoke to it a little bit, is you were a little bit you had to follow FIM, their changes, and you changed things after they did, which kind of put teams a little bit behind the eight ball. But that was because of the way it was, you deferred the FIM on those rules. Is that correct? That it kind of came in at last minute a lot of times, seemingly, to some of the teams,
Yeah,
the changes? Yeah.
we were late on a lot of stuff, and it was definitely not intentional or a lack of work. It was
Right.
just we needed as much data as we could get, to make the right changes right away. And it was hard to come by, It was hard to it's not like we're running a race every weekend, or we
Hmm.
didn't, we don't have a lot of series to this is the first time we were doing this.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think we wanted to make sure we did it right. Ultimately, it took us longer than we had hoped. I mean, it took us more rounds than we would have wanted, but luckily it kind of worked out in the end. So
Yeah, it was definitely tricky. I was going to switch and ask you a question about Twins Cup, but I want to make sure, Paul, are you cool if we talk about a different class, or do you have anything more you wanted to ask about Junior Cup?
Nah, let's move on to another one. We're fine with that.
Okay, so here's a specific question for you about Twins Cup. Actually, it's a couple of them, James. This class, there's been a lot of talk in this class, and I've kind of argued or agreed with some teams that have felt that this possibly is a stepping stone from Junior Cup. It's an intermediary class between Junior Cup and Super Sport just by virtue of the displacement and size of the motorcycles. But there are older riders in it, and it's a tuner class. There's a lot. It seems to be pretty wide open to a lot of things going on. So from your perspective as a technical person, the person in charge of this, where do you land on Twins Cup as what it is? Do you think it is both? Do you think it could be a stepping stone? It kind of almost supplants Superstock 600 as an in-between?
in club racing it is. We used to see a lot of kids go from 125s and stuff like that to the Twins class before they went to 600. It all depends on who shows up in the end.
Right.
It's if we start getting these kids from Junior Cup to sign up for Twins, then it might just turn into that, but if it's really just who shows up, and who's interested in the class. So
right. And I've heard for sure Drake Beecham is going to race Twins Cup this year, and he's kind of looking at it as a step into Super Sport. But then you have some of these other guys, seasoned riders like Chris Turner or Chris Parrish, who won the class, and they think of it kind of as their own thing. For Chris, I think he's rebooting his career a little bit. For Chris Turner, for Chris Parrish, it's a little bit like I've been a club racer, and this is kind of my specialty, and I'm going to keep tweaking this SV650 and for all it's worth. There's quite a bit you can do in that class. Is that correct? It's pretty open. Okay.
It's when we first started talking about it, it was we don't allow a lot of modifications across any of our classes. It's to really tear down the motor and put rods in it and pistons in it. That doesn't exist anymore, even at like the World Superbike level. So that's why we made this class, was something that isn't extraordinarily expensive, but it's stuff that people do on the regular club races. People show up with 2mm over motors every weekend at these club races and stuff. And these are standard modifications. And this way we could actually bring in companies that haven't been able to sell products to our paddock in a while, like rod companies and piston companies and camshaft companies and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of where we were going.
All right, here's a question for you. And I was actually going to answer this on Facebook, but answering things on Facebook sometimes isn't a great idea, especially for me.
Yes, Sean, stop.
I know, but I have an overwhelming sense of justice sometimes. And but somebody asked a question that I think I know the answer to, but I'm going to throw it out to you as if this person asked you. A couple people, I think it was one person, maybe two. Somebody had said in the Twins Cup class, "Hey, what about that KTM 790?" So, James, what about that KTM 790?
It won't be in the Twins Cup this year. We tested the bike, and it's a great bike, but I feel like it was out of reach for the other competitors, for the other manufacturers in this class. So, yeah.
I'm not a smart guy, but it's a 790 or somewhat close to a 790 cc engine, I believe. Isn't that the reason that it's not? It's just a bigger engine.
Yeah. When we first made the class, we didn't know who was going to show up. Is it going to be SVs or we even had a provision for BMW 800s.
Yes.
And, we included a lot of motorcycles to see who was going to homologate their bikes. And in the end, it was Kawasaki, Yamaha, and Suzuki that actually homologated the bikes. And those were the guys that showed up and, filled the grids with those bikes. So we kind of decided from there that the spread in CCs was too far. So we reduced the CCs to 750 unless it's air cooled, and we're gonna see how that works out.
Just so you know, my response was going to be, "There's no replacement for displacement."
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm not a tech guy, but at least I knew that was a bigger engine bike. Yeah, can you explain to us? You said who was going to homologate the bike. Can you explain that process? Who does it? How it's done? Is it a manufacturer thing?
Yeah, in most cases, it's FIM does the whole thing for us. But since Twins is our class, we did the homologation for this. And basically, we have a document that has all the requirements, which include that the bike be a production motorcycle, and so many units are sold in America, and they're available to competitors, and they're under a certain MSRP, which I believe for this class is $15,000. And the manufacturer has to, basically sign off on all that they're guaranteeing that all these things are true. And then they also provide us with the blueprints for the motorcycle. For almost every part on the motorcycle, we have a document that has its dimensions and its weight and its tolerance. And we use that so in case there is ever a protest, we can always go back to these documents, or even just the physical part, and compare it to whatever is being protested.
Mm. And you say tolerance because these parts wear, they change a little bit, and there is a tolerance level. They're not all exactly to the thousandth or whatever. Is that correct?
It's not wear, it's manufacturing tolerance.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So it's, but they are very, on these motors, when they spin this kind of RPM, there's not a very big tolerance for anything, going on.
Right.
So, they're within grams on, the weight of a rod or something like that. It may only be a 5-gram tolerance from their heaviest to their lightest.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm. Has there been much from a technical aspect in the super sport class? It's predominantly Yamaha R6s and a few Suzuki GSXRs and Kawasaki, which I'm hoping and expecting that we're going to have more Kawasaki's on the grid this year. Where's the 600 class in your mind, and has there been much from a technical aspect you've had to deal with?
We made a pretty big change this year for this season in getting rid of the stock 600 and then finding an engine package somewhere in between Super Sport and stock 600. And it kind of worked out. We looked at where the competition was in stock 600 and how the bikes, in 2017, if you look at the stock 600 class, the Gixxer 600s and the Yamahas were running fairly equal. And we looked at those modifications as why are they running equal? And we found a couple differences across manufacturers, like porting on certain bikes does more for this manufacturer, and these velocity stacks work good for this manufacturer, but not as good for this one. So by eliminating some of those things, I think we actually did pretty good of making an equal platform for the bikes. So,
and that'll remain the same for this year, for 2019?
Yeah, we haven't made any changes for Super Sport in that regard.
Okay. How close is stock 1000 spec wise or tech wise to what Super Stock 1000 was? Is it close to the same?
No, it's a completely different bike.
Okay.
Stock 1000 or Super Stock 1000, we kind of had a fear that putting the bikes on the same track at the same time, that there were certain things that had to be the same. Basically, a Super Stock 1000 was a Superbike from 2015 without the motor. They had swing arm modifications. They had full brake systems. I mean, there was a lot of modifications they could do on those super stock 1,000 bikes. When we decided to separate the class, we went back to a true stock 1,000 class, which the brakes came off. There's no motor modifications. There's no swing arm modifications. They could basically do suspension. They do allow for some data and some fuel mapping, and that's about it, though. Those are truly stock bikes.
So, can the electronics in a stock 1000 bike be flashed at all?
Yes, yeah, we do allow flashing. Yeah, we do allow flashing for the ECU.
Okay. You mentioned about with the engines in Superstock 1000, I remember the fact that, I guess all the other modifications except for the engine, and I believe possibly you couldn't do a lot with the radiator possibly, or maybe some teams didn't, but it seems like those bikes ran extremely hot because they were kind of super bikes that didn't have quite the engine or the thermal transfer advantages that a superbike engine does. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is true. And, unfortunately that happens, but they need, quite a bit of air, especially when they're in the draft or when they're like at Miller down that long straightaway. Yes. Right. There's not a lot. Every bike overheats there, so, making that kind of horsepower, it's going to happen.
Right.
But, so I think, but they're doing pretty good now with the, a lot more stock configuration.
I see what you're saying. Go ahead, Paul.
Do you guys want to talk about Superbike rules?
Oh, yes.
I just stepped back into the room. I actually went for a run, which was quite nice. Sean just kind of took over, and maybe we should make it Sean Bice and Paul Carruthers instead of Paul Carruthers and Sean Bice. We start talking about technical shit, and the guy just runs off with the whole damn show.
How about the Sean and James show?
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Now I'm completely eliminated. Maybe I could take Doug's job.
Off track with Morse and Bice. Featuring occasional visits from Paul Carruthers.
Yeah. Anyhow, let's talk about the Superbike rules, because obviously there's been a lot of talk about it. A lot's been written about it. So let's hear from James on that. It basically comes back to the electronics, which seems to be the conversation of for any series you talk about in the world now. It's just, we're at that point where everything comes back to electronics because obviously it's so important and it has so much control over everything. Tell us a little bit about what we've got going for the coming season with regard to Superbike rules, James.
Well, this year we added an additional Superbike kit that we're calling the MotoAmerica Approved Superbike Kit. I think the terminology might change in the future, but we found that, this isn't new, but over the last couple of years that we needed kind of a mid system that is a little more affordable, a little possibly easier to work with for, it's, I think, maybe not easier to work with, but for the teams that are here, they're more familiar with these Motec systems. So in the past, we haven't had, I guess, the buying power to really offer a complete kit at a good price that everybody can use. And recently, FIM and BSB and I think a Spanish series and an Italian series were also all looking for this system. We just happened to get it going first. So it's a Motec system based on what they call the M130 ECU, and it's got the BSB spec Superbike software with the addition of traction control and wheelie control and launch control, and there's some data logging and stuff like that. And it's a spec system that all these other series are likely to adapt exactly like this. So it will be kind of an international spec Superbike ECU. And
James, that's interesting. So I wanted to understand that because people have sometimes said BSB. Why aren't we like BSB? And of course, our thing is we want to try to mimic or mirror some of what World Superbike is doing. But you're saying BSB, these parameters that we have that they don't have, they're probably going to adopt those additional intervention parameters on their ECUs?
I don't believe BSB will. I mean, that's completely up to them. But this is, but I know that the Spanish Superbike series and the Italian series were both looking for this ECU, and they both want that traction control. BSB does a lot without these functions. But our issue is that BSB, they only allow one ECU, so everybody runs this. Every bike has the same one with the same parameters. We're allowing options. So if we didn't allow traction control, well, a stock ECU allows traction control. So it wouldn't be very useful to our competitors.
So why do they only allow one ECU, and why don't we do that?
Well, I don't know why. I mean, I can't speak for them, but I can say that, most Americans in general don't want to be told what to buy.
Sure.
I guess.
Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, they want an option. So it's hard to, anytime we say spec, everyone's like, oh, you see a bunch of eyes roll, and they want to do their own. Everyone wants to do their own thing, but in the case of fairness, it's a lot easier to control whether people are using the right stuff if we have a limited amount of options.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. This is not disrespectful to Paul in any way, but it is called Yankee ingenuity. We do like to try different things. Am I right?
Right.
Okay.
For sure. So,
Paul, is there Australian ingenuity at all? Does that exist? Your dad's pretty ingenious, though. He came up with some crazy things, didn't he?
Yeah, he was ingenious when you had to be.
Yeah.
Because if back then when you had to make changes to the motorcycle, you pulled out a saw and you cut a piece out of the frame and you rewelded it.
Right.
And then people in his position just kind of became parts fitters.
Right.
And that's when I think he kind of, wasn't enjoying it as much anymore. So
Right.
Yeah, he's an ingenious fellow.
Yes, I could tell.
And he makes really good kids too.
Debatable.
Well, he had to have some ingenuity for you. Let's put it that way.
Or patience.
Oh man. Hey, so James, okay, you're going to probably disagree with me, but I'm going to count this on my hands. I see there's 5 different options. Okay, there's a stock ECU that probably nobody does. There's a stock ECU that you can flash. There is a kit ECU, like I'm going to say YEC's kit, the kit that Yamaha offers, a kit ECU. There is, I guess, the Magneti Marelli system, and now we have this Motec. Am I right? Is that the correct number?
Correct.
Okay, because I'm separating stock ECU from stock ECU that's flashed. I know nobody would probably run a stock ECU, but you could.
Yeah, there's 5, but only 3 that matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, right, and that's exactly the crux of my question here. In the 3 that matter, how do you decide? Is it based on cost? Is it based on complications of the system? Tell me about that.
Well, first, there is the Magneti Marelli, but it doesn't have to be a Magneti Marelli. That just happens to be.
Okay.
It has to be the manufacturer chooses who they want to use as their Superbike system, and everyone in our paddock, Suzuki, Yamaha, that's their system. Honda they kept going back and forth on, and I'm not talking about our Honda, but World Superbike Honda.
Mm-hmm.
They were using a Cosworth system at one point, but I think the Marelli ended up being what they used. Either way, I think that now you have to decide what system you can maximize as a team. So the top system, the Marelli system, is, it's really indefinite in its capability. Everything's unlocked. you can do everything, every possible function you can think of, from corner to corner mapping, corner to corner traction control, I mean, really sophisticated stuff. The Motec system is one step down from there, where you have a little more simplicity to it as far as how it calculates its traction control and all that stuff. So and then obviously, like, your kit systems are way more basic from that. So really, if you want to, I think if the teams want to do their best, and perform their best, is just be realistic with what system they're capable of maximizing. So, and I think that's one of the problems was with the Morelli system. Not a lot of people were accustomed to using it. It was a big switch from the Motec systems that they were used to, but the Morelli system itself is very capable system. I mean, it's, you can see what they're doing in World Superbike. Those bikes are moving,
Mm-hmm.
So
is it almost too wide open for some teams, because you can kind of get somewhat lost in the deep end? You don't know, there's too much to change and adjust. Do you think that's fair? Okay.
Not just that, but I mean, there's not even, the base settings from it. It's not like you can just load a program and let's go racing and make some fine-tuned adjustments. I mean, you look at the Yoshimura and Yamaha. I mean, you go into their pit and they have there's about 600 people looking at a computer making changes, and that's just to make the rain light turn on. So, I mean, there's a lot to it. It's a complicated system.
Yeah, I used to walk into this year. I would walk into the Yosh camp pit area of their truck, and it cracks me up how they have the table set up and they have all the guys. It looks like an IT department. They're all sitting there with their laptops, and they're all facing out, but their screens are obviously facing in, so nobody can see what they're doing. And so I would always go in and go, "Hey, you guys playing video games over there?" And I would never get too much laughter out of them, because they're not the types of guys that like to laugh too much.
They don't joke around at all on that.
No, they don't.
You expect like something to take off from Vandenberg, when they're done.
Hey, just to let you know, Sean, James and I have our computers flipped around that way too, but for different reasons.
Well, I was going to say maybe there's that going on too, but I don't know.
You're wondering why the internet is slow at the races.
Yeah. It's a different kind of flash tuning.
Doesn't somebody in Costa Mesa monitor that stuff? Isn't there a big brother watching it all times?
You'll know when we don't have a job anymore.
Right. Well, no, we'll read about it on Road Racing World is what'll happen. Like that poor club racer this week that we read about. Oh my goodness. Hey, so I was talking with Westby Racing, Chuck Giucchetto, and they went all full in and got a Magneti Morelli system, and they have a technician, Herschel, who apparently was with Yoshimura Suzuki, who's, they knew that they had to get somebody to operate the system. And I didn't really ask Chuck or that team. I assumed that they knew that this Motec was coming out. I didn't ask him. I wonder if that would have been an option for them to consider, because, it's a little bit less costly, or maybe, I guess they feel like Matthew really wanted to be all in on a full Magneti Morelli system. So it's interesting that maybe some teams at this point can make a decision as far as that new Motec system. Do you think? I mean, it provides another option, correct?
Yeah, and I hope it maybe nudges people that were afraid of the Morelli system to get into Superbike. Or maybe guys have been holding out in stock 1,000 because they don't want to, because they feel like they need to go all in, to make a presence in Superbike. But I feel like this Motec system will be very competitive, and you'll be all run at the front with it, and at a little lesser cost. And really the big cost is the personnel. It's the people running the system. It's not the cost of the system itself. And I think you're going to be able to find more people that will be comfortable working with it. But I mean, you look at the Westby team; they did a great job. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they made the bike work, and he was able to ride up front plenty of times, and that's a big task, you know.
Yeah, that
So
was kind of one of my
good for
arguments. I
them.
mean, the fact that, well, you have, I know that, well, I guess in the case of Richard Stanboli, he had a magnetic relay system last year. Is that right, James?
Yeah, right.
And so, but to your point, yeah, Westby had I believe it was a flash tuned kit or a kit of some sort, but it wasn't a full magnetic relay. They're going to have that for this coming year, but they won a race. And Kyle
Yeah.
Wyman last year, 2 years ago at this point, I guess, or 2 seasons ago, got on the podium with a flash DCU. So, there is some rider talent involved in there, but the one thing I wanted to ask you is, I don't know if you saw the article I wrote this week, but I was trying to make the argument that there is some, we'll use the term ingenuity. There's some knowledge ingenuity. There's some understanding involved in this hardware, just the way it used to be back in the days when you'd have a guy that was like a wizard with carburetors and understood jetting and, slide openings and all the different mechanical aspects of a carburetor, to the winner. The winners were somewhat determined by people who could really make the most of those carburetors. And of course, the teams that could get flat slides over CV carburetors or round slides, had an advantage. Do you think in some ways this idea of tuning from the old days still exists in this day and age? There are these guys like at Yosh behind the laptops, but they're kind of tuners in their own respect. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think that's what is separating them that's separating the guys that are winning from the guys that aren't.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of just dyno time that these guys put on their bikes is incredible. To get like everyone talks about how Chuck Graves lives in his dyno, and is constantly making maps for the Yamahas and making
Mm-hmm.
improvements and finding a half a horsepower and 1 RPM range or this or that, but they're just constantly making the bike run at peak performance, at the pot, taking, doing whatever they can to squeeze every last drop out of it.
I got another one, Paul, but you go ahead. I'm dominating again.
No. No, you're on a roll
Okay.
and you're a good dominator, so just keep going.
I'm a dominator, yes. Okay, James, a couple other questions. Now, this goes way back, and Paul will remember this. I recall back in it was early 90s when Vance and Hines Yamaha had their big truck, and one of the first big trucks in the paddock, magenta, yellow, and black color livery on the bikes. And they had carbon discs with carbon shrouds on them way back in 1990, and those things were unbelievable. Of course, it took a little while for them to get heat in them so they could actually use the full stopping capability. We haven't seen carbon brakes and things like that for years and years and years. Are we going to see that again at any point? And why don't we have them now in this age of, the best technology wins races?
I think cost is really just the bottom line on that. I mean, even though it seems like it sounds stupid when you have all these, you're already spending $10,000 on a set of forks and stuff like that. But, those braking systems are incredibly expensive. And, you just say, hey, you can't run it, then nobody can run it. And then, it helps a little bit. But I think it just comes down to cost. I don't see anything. I haven't heard anything in FIM or anything about introducing carbon rotors again to the paddock.
Okay. And carbon wheels is the same way, of course. It's probably a cost thing with those as well.
Well, carbon wheels, I think that's partly the certification procedure, because there are rumors that a carbon wheel may be allowed soon, and it may be on a stock BMW. And
wow.
because it's what comes with the bike. So we'll see how that turns out, but it may be the OEM wheel on those bikes. So we'll see what happens with the new BMW.
Yeah, that's cool. It's just surprising that some of this technology, that's been around for us a really long time. I mean, back in the day we had carburetors, now we have fuel injection. There wasn't a whole lot of fuel injection back then, if any. But at one time there were actually higher I don't know if I want to say higher spec brakes, because obviously the brakes nowadays are incredible. But I know obviously MotoGP runs carbon rotors with carbon pads, and we don't. And I understand that's a prototype series and all that. So it makes sense. It's just kind of interesting, though, that in some ways it's the pointy end, it's the sharp end of the stick, but within reason, I guess. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Superbike, MotoAmerica Superbike. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, I got a question for James, not you, Sean.
Talk to me, Goose.
Okay, so you're in tech and you're sitting at your, illustrious picnic table or whatever it is.
With a cover, with a black cover on it.
With it, no, it does look nice. There's probably a company approved logo somewhere on there. And like if there's a Junior Cup dad walking towards you quickly, and there's a Superbike crew chief walking towards you quickly, which one ultimately ends up giving you the most trouble?
Well, the problem with the Junior Cup dads is they don't come as one. They come as a flock of dads. So,
right.
There's a gaggle of dads that come, your way. So you're getting
right, and they've pre-gamed at somebody's motorhome, and then they've decided to come talk to you.
Then they fire off at every direction, and then you have the crew chief from the Superbike team. When they come up, they start with, I already have you fired. So just think about that,
Right.
So, they're both tough. In the end, though, the nice thing I would say in the paddock is we have a lot of heated discussions, all the time. And it happens out on pit lane. It happens in tech. But at the end of the day, we usually, make amends for whatever happened. It's just the environment that, you're on a time crunch constantly. You need to know information right away. And it's just a environment that invites, that type of conversation. So,
what's your busiest day at the track?
That's a great question.
Saturdays. So Saturdays we have, it's all the rounds. We have all of our second qualifying, and we do the races later in the afternoon. So that's when we're doing our most post inspections, and it's some people's last chance to qualify or get a better position, and Super Pole also. So there's a lot going on in hot pit, and if they crash in the middle of the session or something, they have to get the thing repaired, and it's got to be safe enough to go back out again. So usually we have all our tech guys out there making sure that that the bikes are getting put back together before they go out again.
Now there's not a lot of tearing down,
right,
so to speak, anymore, is there?
No, not as. I mean, there is and there isn't. All those Superbike teams will tear their motors down once or twice a year. It is kind of random, and it's based on. Sometimes we'll have one of our tech volunteers pick somebody, and mm-hmm. which is weird because that always seems to catch them, but there we have kind of scheduled teardowns where we will seal the motors up, and we'll wait till that the life cycle of the motor is over before we tear it apart, unless they want to do it right away. But then, your penalties are proactive or retroactive to the time that you sealed the motor.
Right.
James, can you explain what the concept of sealing a motor means?
Basically, we just put security stickers and sometimes safety wire on various bolts and covers so that they can't disassemble the motor. So if we put one across the valve cover and the oil pan, then you can't get, the crankshaft out of it. So, then later on, maybe 2 or 3 rounds down, the motor is either expired or it's just had its time out because of mileage. And then when we do tear them down, we completely tear them down and we inspect everything: crankshaft, rods, valves, pistons, and we weigh everything and we compare it against our documents and physical parts. So it's kind of it's a long procedure for both of us. It's not.
So do the teams bring an engine to you and you guys take the engine back to Costa Mesa, or how does, when it's time to tear down an engine, do you do it on a race weekend or in between rounds is my question, I guess.
Both. We do it on a race.
Okay.
I mean, they are always the ones that disassemble their motor, but it's in the presence. Like, we have to be there while it's being taken apart. But sometimes I'll go to, the Yamaha in Cyprus, and we'll do teardowns there or at Yosh. But it's just it just depends on the timing. As long as one of us is there, we can do it.
It's funny. I actually have a little anecdote about this. I witnessed this a couple of years ago. It was a time when Rick Hobbs, who, for people that don't know, is the crew chief for Cameron Bobier, and it had been time for whatever reason, they needed to tear down Cameron's engine. And at the time, Rick had gotten hurt. He was stepping across the wall. I think it was Laguna Seca, and he blew out his knee. So he was a little bit semi-ambulatory at the time. And he ended up sitting in a chair, and Jim Roach, who was the tire, essentially, well, he was Josh Hayes' crew chief. What am I saying? But focused more on tires and stuff. He didn't really do a lot of the engine teardown because Rick handled that for both of the riders. And Rick sat there and he talked to Jim, who knew exactly what he was doing, but he was still telling him, okay, after you remove this part, there's going to be 4 bolts underneath, 4 cap screws that you have to take off. And there was somebody from MotoAmerica standing here. I can't remember, James, if it was you, but we all kind of sat there and watched James tear down this engine. Was that you?
Yeah. I remember that in the truck.
Yeah, I sat there and watched it. And I thought it was so fascinating because Rick was kind of doing it without even touching the engine. Right. And like I said, Jim could have handled it, but it was good to have Rick there because Rick builds them and Rick can tear them down again. So it's a pretty involved and long process. That was incredible to see that happen.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think the teams actually like it. In the past, they were a lot more aggressive about, take your motor out now and tear it down, no matter how many miles were on it. And that's just an expense. If the guy knows that he's not cheating, then he doesn't have to worry about losing the next 3 rounds of points when we finally do tear it down. Mm-hmm. And if you are cheating, then let's get it over with, and we just dock you for the round that you used it in. But I think it helps the teams to be able to, not have to spend money, just to put a motor back together that they weren't expecting to disassemble.
Yeah, I think now there's just a level of consideration where before there wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes before, and again, I was working for Cycle News at the time, so I wasn't on the inside as much as I am now. But sometimes before, it was just like, I just got the impression that it was just like, oh yeah, watch this. We're going to make you tear this stuff down. And it was just, you kind of just felt bad for the team that was involved because, it might not have necessarily been, it's probably never a good time, but I think sometimes it seemed like they picked really bad times to make somebody, and it was almost like, oh yeah, I'll take this kind of a thing. And it's nice to see that atmosphere is completely changed because I'm sure the teams appreciate it.
Yeah. And then the other side of that is you just want to make sure that you are, tearing down enough motors so that the teams are comfortable knowing that, people are being checked. Too.
Right.
So, that's a big part of it also. But some of the teams will come up and say, tear us down. We don't want to pack the truck tonight. So if we're here working on the bike, then we don't have to take the awning down in the rain,
Right. And you probably volunteer to watch that one, so you don't have to load the truck.
That's awesome. That's really good.
Yeah.
Hey, James, can you explain? There's a wrinkle that came into, I believe, into American road racing with the advent of the MotoAmerica era. And it's the concept of parc ferme and what goes on there. And I don't recall that in AMA pro racing days, that was something that was done. Can you explain what's going on there with all those bikes? They have to all go to that one spot and what they do when they're there?
Well, it seems like it was a shock to everyone to bring every bike in. But when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because if you don't have that period where people have an opportunity to protest, which I believe they've always had, is, whatever the period is. For us, it's 30 minutes after the session. Any team can protest any team. But if you don't have the bike sitting in front of you, then how do you know that it hasn't been altered? In the past, they just let everybody go back to their trailer. But if you come up 15 minutes later and say, hey, I think you're running an illegal ECU or something, well, how do you know they haven't already changed it?
Right.
So the concept is get every bike in, don't let anybody touch it. And that's how it was on the track for that session. And that it does a couple things. I mean, you have that chance to protest the bike, and that that's exactly how it was when it was on the track. And two, it gives teams a chance to look at other bikes,
right.
And they look at them and they go, hey, this guy's doing this or this guy's doing this. And that's just looking at when you have all the junior cups out there and one guy has a double bubble windscreen, it really stands out. Right. Compared to,
right.
compared to just looking at one bike at a time. But a lot of these little infractions and stuff, do stand out. And, the teams aren't stupid. They all look at what everyone else has. And I think it also gives them a feeling of that there is a level of fairness going on because, everybody has to have a standard windscreen or somebody, everybody has to have a hydraulic cam chain tensioner and et cetera. And so all the parts that you can see,
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I thought the purpose of parc ferme is for you guys to look at the bikes. I didn't realize it was kind of for the entire field to look at each other's motorcycles close up right after. And if there's a question or something, anybody can ask. That's wow. That's really enlightening to me. I had no idea. Do you have situations where a team or maybe a rider or a crew chief representing a rider will come up to you and say, hey, can you check so-and-so's bike? I'm not sure, blah, blah, blah. Has that happened?
Yeah, I mean, that's how it happens. That's kind of the standard. We get that quite a bit.
Okay. And what do you ever find anything that you have to have somebody fix?
Yes. I mean, we find stuff every round. We might have 20 or 30 items, and most of it's safety related, and there are some safety rules that maybe people aren't used to from AMA to compared to now, like tank foam, that it's that foam that everybody has to put inside their tank and
right.
And a lot of people aren't used to having that, but we check every bike, that it's got it. And even the rain lights thing was, people were very confused when it first came out. Like, what kind of light, and what does it have to look like? And it's actually just a really simple device. And I think people are more accustomed to it now, and it's not such a big deal. But it definitely took an adjustment period, to get all the bikes up to spec.
Regarding Superbike, so this is an interesting question that just popped in my head all of a sudden. World Superbike.
Oh no!
World Superbike, I believe, does this. I used to have this conversation with somebody that was in our paddock. He was not anymore, but he was a journalist, a writer who hated the fact that the bikes had headlights on them because he felt like it was kind of like NASCAR, and he said, "I don't care if World Superbike does it." And I don't mean functioning headlights. I'm talking about the appearance of headlights. And that's the thing that he had the issue with, is that they're just stickers. What is the rule in MotoAmerica? Is that required? And why do they have that, if it is required?
No, we don't require it. We did require it in Superstock 1000. And it's more to separate the bikes, than anything. It's just to show this is a stock bike and this is a Superbike. Okay. And so we never required it in Superbike. But yeah.
But some teams did run it.
Yeah, you can still run it. I mean, some people like how it looks, but it's just cosmetic, It's right. But it's the same with the windscreens. I mean, double bubble windscreens you can buy them for anything and they're the same cost, but there's a appearance to it that, makes a bike look more stock when it's got a standard windscreen versus a double bubble. And that's the reason that these rules are the way they are,
But a double bubble windscreen is not illegal.
It is in stock 1000.
Oh, in stock 1000, but not obviously not Superbike.
Not in Superbike, yeah.
Okay.
Double bubble trouble is what you get in. That's James's favorite.
Boy, so James, stock 1000 really is get a hyper bike, 1000 cc or whatever it might be, displacement bike off a showroom floor, safety wire it, take off some things and put it in the show. It really isn't. It's really not much other than that, huh?
I mean, I think it really shows, what the best stock bike is.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing a lot of, Kawasaki's out there.
Yes.
And we're seeing some BMWs. People are saying, hey, I can't do much to this thing. So which one out of the box is going to work for me?
Yeah, and a little bit of a factor with that, too, is from what we hear of the riders, the contingency support program from the manufacturers helps with that, too. But you're right. I mean, Kawasaki, it seems like, man, with what Bobby Fong did a couple of years ago with the stock 1000 bike, it seems like out of the box, that thing is pretty stout. And certainly Andrew Lee proved that this year with stock 1000 as well, and certainly that BMW, to your point. But I didn't realize how stock those bikes really were, and I didn't also realize that they're more stock than a super stock 1000 bike was. Quite a bit more stock from what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, see, it's because you don't have an office next to James, or you'd know this stuff.
I think James is glad that we don't, because I'd have to cut a hole in the wall just so I could stick my face in and go, hey, what about this part? Or, can you look at this and tell me what's going on?
Right.
Funny story about the windscreens was in 2015, our first year, the stock 600 class required non-double bubble windscreens. And after the first qualifying round, we brought them all in for Parc Fermé, and every bike failed except for Ann Roberts. So wow. She was the only person that showed up with a stock windscreen. And, it was too much to disqualify everybody. It's kind of like the, what happened in MotoGP where everyone's just a row behind, that was everyone was overnighting windscreens that day,
Wow. I wonder if it was just happenstance that Anne was the only one that complied. I wonder if she knew, did she read something that somebody else didn't? I don't know.
She says she
maybe
read
the rule book.
Right? She says,
right.
And everyone else swears they read them, but we'll see.
We used to hear, or at least I thought we did, or I did, used to hear people in the paddock on teams that would read rule books and find some kind of crazy loophole or something. The next thing you know, they'd come up with something and they're like, well, hey, it's not in the rule book, or the rule book states this. Do you have any of that happen nowadays where anybody says they read between the lines on something?
Well, people try to, but the big difference between us and what AMA was doing was AMA was telling you everything that you can't do to the motorcycle. and we're telling you everything that you can do. So if it's not on there, it's not legal. So we specifically say you can add, you can replace the calipers. They used to say, it would be the opposite. They would say you can't run anything but stock calipers. But people would go, well, this stock, that's there's a optional stock caliper, or there's one that the factory sells, but it is still considered stock, but you can't, that doesn't work with our rule book. If it doesn't specifically say that you can do it, then you can't. And that's actually the first line of each chapter. It says anything that's not in here can't be done.
It's really good. It's really good parenting skills too.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of, it mirrors the philosophy of what I perceive MotoAmerica to be. We went from an organization that was a can't do to an organization which is a can do. And the idea that MotoAmerica is pretty responsive to the needs and desires of the riders and teams in the paddock. And it's all about, well, let's see what we can do. So that's interesting that it extends all the way to the rules, James. That's pretty cool. I'm pretty proud of that.
Sean, you're killing me.
I can't help it. We're all winners. So what am I supposed to say?
I know.
Do I get a trophy?
A group hug or something.
Do I get a participation trophy?
You'll get a medal.
I feel like the Star Spangled Banner should come on right now or something.
Yeah. Yeah, Sean's holding his hand over his heart, just listening to the words "MotoAmerica."
Yeah, I will pledge allegiance.
Actually, one word
for sure.
Well, guys, I'm gonna put an end to this because I think I know. I think it's the longest podcast in the history of On Track with Bice and Carruthers, because I already moved that around since he talked more than me. But
don't do that. I'm not. I'm second fiddle, and that's where I want to be. So.
Yeah, you're a good second fiddle. I appreciate your fiddle.
Thank you.
James, I appreciate you joining us today, and you're awesome, as I knew you would be, and you explain things well, and you're a solid individual, and I'm proud to have you as my next door neighbor in the office. So
thanks, buddy.
I'm sorry I'm not there. I'm not there to entertain, but you have a good holiday, and same to you, Sean.
Thank you, Paul.
Same to our listeners out there. We're actually not going to do this next week. We're gonna take a little time off, and Sean will probably be freaking drunk all the time and won't be able to do it anyways. I can imagine his questions if he's drunk. James, could you?
Yeah, you don't want to see that.
Do you do any Santa Claus gigs in the off season, or?
Well, that's why we're not doing it. Sean's got 3 malls lined up in the greater
malls
Ohio area.
Florida whiskey.
I do have a belly like a bowl full of jelly or whatever that is in this.
Yeah. Yeah, well, your Junior Cup bike will get to be lighter than mine, so you're going to be good. Right. So to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. These things are available on Saturday mornings. That might change during the season, but at least for now, they're available Saturday mornings, and we appreciate you guys listening in. And everybody have a happy holiday. Be safe, and we will talk to you in, 2 weeks.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays. Thanks, James. See you, Paul.
Thank you, guys.
All right, bye guys. Bye-bye.